dog in the office?
Yeah, there's a dog in the office.
Is that Bo?
Yeah.
Is that Sloan? Tell them I say hi. Never met
There's a
them.
mad dog over here. What's up, guys?
What's
Mad
up?
dog?
You said there were a dog in the office. I started that. You're good.
It's a mad dog. I get it now.
Did I click record?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta make sure every time now, man.
Don't want to go through that again.
So we haven't talked in a while. All right.
Oh, we'll wait. Hello.
How's it going?
Good. Here, come
I'm good too.
on. Hi.
What's up, gang?
Hello.
What's going on?
Dude, that's some flow there. I'm jealous.
Like that?
He's getting on the board. He has to.
You better be able to pull that
Yeah, good. Man buns only on the board.
only. It is a rule.
Who are you guys? Who's on today? Snow. Oh yeah. Ask him how.
Hopefully.
Yeah. What's his beard game? What's the oils? What kind of stuff's he rubbing in there?
Yeah.
Pumping. How much testosterone does he take weekly?
Okay, but please tell him I said hi.
Yeah, tell him we said it.
Will do.
We'll do.
Okay. Absolutely.
See you
Have
guys.
fun.
See you.
See you later.
Have a good weekend in all your different places. Oh, I'll let you know if we come by. I didn't pee, that's why. Don't worry about that. Oh, wow. We got like an intro here.
Or are you looking at the thing?
Yeah, I finally just looked at it.
All right. Can we start recording again? I feel like none of that was usual.
I can. Just leave it. I'll edit it.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah, that'll be easy to cut. But yeah, if Connor, you just want to lead some kind of catch-up discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like
Okay.
you know best. So,
Okay. I'm just gonna, we'll just plug this in to start and then we'll come back with the intro. Okay, so thanks for joining us for another episode of the R2 podcast. I'm your host, Connor, and it is great to be back. Fellas, how you doing?
Doing good.
It's been a while since we've all recorded together. I've been keeping updated with the podcast, but being on the West Coast, sometimes the schedules don't line up, and I'm glad that I have you guys here to keep this thing rolling. So how was the rep retreat?
it's awesome, man. Yeah. I think it went way better than we expected, to be honest. Not that I had
Really?
poor expectations, but I feel like it went pretty well.
Yeah, it was awesome to kind of get everyone together. I think we had 5 schools there, maybe about 20 people. So a lot of opportunity to meet people that we've only met either on Zoom or just in passing at random events and stuff. So getting everyone together on the same page has been pretty sweet.
Yeah, I'm really going to try and get our new reps to come next year. How's it going?
Peachy, how you doing?
Excellent. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Who am I talking to today beyond you? Sean Roberts and R2P or NSEB. Who the hell are
Just
you
his
guys?
nickname.
Dr. Snell, my name is Alex Coleman. It's nice to meet you. I'm supposed to tell you that Bo and Sloan say hello and they miss you.
Excellent. Well, give the howdy back. Where are you coming out of? NSEB?
So that's just the National Student Executive Board for R2P that has been, I guess, going for the last 2 years now.
Got it. Yeah.
I guess officially these guys are taking it over as of last week. So
The train keeps rolling.
yeah.
Very good. Sean, where are you located?
Logan. So St. Louis.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right. Well, very good. Nice
Yep.
to see the cross-body representation of, I think, 2 of the stronger schools right now for R2P.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
Going.
Yeah, when I was
Don't
when I was
tell the
looking at the
GMAX
voting for the I was looking for the voting at the national board. It was just Logan. Like, come on, let's split it up a bit here, guys.
We went back and forth on that, whether we were gonna have like a hard fast rule of you can't have more than one rep from the same school. And it just worked out that it didn't. I'm glad that we have a different rep from each school. So
Yeah.
Well, at least from the outside looking in now, for ever since the beginnings of this R2P process, because I was right there at the beginning, getting things going. And it's been cool to see some of the schools, the kind of ebb and flow, and the ebb and flow has been less school focused, and I think a little bit more personality focused, quite honestly, because as you guys can completely appreciate, there's different, you experience it in the clubs yourselves with the people that you're working with, and some people, they're cut out to be able to keep a lot of balls in the air and still be able to stay in school and learn your normal programs. My hat's off to all of you guys for being able to do this, and going through a pandemic and having to do all of this extra online training. It's just stupid. I'm amazed that that R2P is able to continue to go, because the schooling in general is relatively grueling, 32 hours on average of didactic on a week. And now you're throwing extra stuff on board here, and you're doing all of that with all of the online stuff. It's exhausting, guys.
He's like, yeah,
Definitely feels that way.
One thing I would love to see that I've historically not seen too much, Natasha Torgerson was an able-bodied female rep.
We have one.
Good.
Yeah, we just hired one.
Yeah, me too, R2P. Let's make it happen.
There you go. I like it.
And the other thing that Justin Dean requests and sort of lobbies for on a regular basis, he feels sometimes like he's done a disservice to the whole R2P thing. If any one person really kind of made R2P into what it is right now, was Justin, because he really ran with it hard when we put him on the at the helm at Western States here. And everything then with him and the guy that came after him, Ben Ramos, both of those guys worked in my office, and both of them were really, really hardcore exercise focused. Very little in manual therapy. Justin now does almost no exercise therapy, almost none.
Interesting.
Ben does a mixture of both. The reason why Justin has moved away from exercise has to do with the market that he's in. His market is very high level cash practice in one of the most difficult markets in the US. He's right in Santa Monica, and he's got the richest, famous folks on his roster, and a lot of them actually get referred to him by trainers that are making $500 an hour in his catchment area. And if Justin starts breaking out trying to be a trainer to them, to those referrals over to him, then you wind up with a little bit of lane violation.
That makes sense.
So he's had to get a lot better on his manual work, and that's been a lot of the focus of his professional work. So what are we gonna do, guys? Tell me how we're gonna play.
So I'll do a little intro and then start peppering you with questions. And I know you said you got Phil at 1 o'clock.
That's been pushed back to 1:30, so I've got lots of cushion room if you need or want. I don't really have a slide deck or anything prepared. I figured this was going to be conversational. I anticipate that one question that I typically run into in forums like this is, what the hell are all these named acronyms that seem to be trailing me around? How do they fit together and all of that? So I have
Yeah.
at least one slide that I put together to try to answer that frequently asked question. It's not a slide, just a PDF, but I can screen share it with you, but probably
Sure.
generally run into the problem of the moderator not having given me the capability to do that, so we can actually force some prep for that.
If you want to send it to me, I can get it.
I can do that too. Cool.
Yeah, don't
You don't want to give up control, do you?
No.
I know.
More he
He hasn't
doesn't.
shared it to us.
The more he doesn't know.
Coming at you. in 3, 2, 1.
I can see Alex creating a new role for himself. Consultant role.
It's on Messenger for you, brother.
Okay, I'll put it in our group chat right now. All right. All
So is
right.
this recorded or live?
Recorded.
Yeah, we're recording right now, and then we just edit everything up. Okay, you guys want to get started right now? We can
Hit it.
bring that up. Okay. All right, ready? Should I just completely restart the
Yeah,
intro?
start.
Yeah, go ahead then, Joe.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the R2 podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Connor, and it is good to be back. Joining us today is the man who holds it down here in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, let's restart. That's a tough start.
You're on a roll, man.
You had it.
I know.
You cannot
Pick
do
the gum up.
re-edits if we're being conversational.
Rich Olden said one take.
One takes, bro.
One take from the top.
All right, here's my take. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the R2P podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Connor, and it is good to be back. Joining us today is the man who holds it down here in the Pacific Northwest, the disc whisperer, Dr. Phillip Snell. Dr. Snell holds an adjunct faculty position at the University of Western States. He runs a successful practice in Portland known as Solutions Sport and Spine at the Kabuki Strength Lab, where he is right now. And he's also the creator and teacher of a number of popular courses for manual therapists, which have culminated into what's now known as the Neurocentric Approach with his old associate, Dr. Justin Dean. And we're going to dive into that a little later today. Before we do, thank you for joining us, Dr. Snell. How are things going with you?
Peachy King, thank you, sir. It is a lovely now Friday afternoon in Portland, Oregon, and the smoke is billowing in on prevailing southwesterly winds. So it's going to be a smoky weekend, it looks like.
Yep. So a lot of our listeners come from out east, as you know, and may not be as familiar with you and your work. So why don't you give us a little background on how you got into chiropractic and how you got to where you are now?
How many hours do we have on this? My route to school was a little bit unconventional. I originally went away to college to be a mechanical engineer at North Carolina State University. I'm from a little podunk town in eastern North Carolina, a redneck town I will gladly never set foot in again. I stayed in engineering school long enough to know that it wasn't what I wanted to do, but it wasn't clear what I wanted to do with my life when I grew up at that point in time. So I took a long hiatus off and explored my navel. And part of that exploring my navel was on the back seat of a bicycle. I knew that I wanted to travel and I wanted to do it intentionally and slowly. And bicycling was very interesting to me at that point in time. I actually went away to mechanical engineering school, hoping at that point in time to take part when I graduated in designing a phenomena that never took place. which was something at that time they called phase 2 bicycling. That was during the OPEC oil embargo, which means that gas prices were rising. Sound familiar? And there was all of this scuttlebutt at that time that we were going to be able at some point to design bicycles that would be able to approach cruising speeds on most highways due to aerodynamic designs and things of that sort. So I was very much into bicycling, and I got on a bicycle and rode away from my home in North Carolina and rode a very intentional sine wave across the United States for 2 years before I wound up in the Pacific Northwest. I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I know where I wanted to do it. I absolutely adored this part of the country. And when I came up here and I saw the mountains and I saw the big trees and I saw the lifestyle and the open-mindedness, which were all in marked contrast to the part of the world that I grew up in, I knew that I wanted to stay out here. And it took me a few years of meandering about up here before I figured out what I wanted to do. And I started going back to recapture the remaining credits that I had left on the table from dropping out of school early at this point, 12 years previously. So I was out of school for 12 years for most of my 20s. I sometimes joke that I retired in my 20s. So I lived, among those times, I lived in Seattle at Ground Zero during the whole grunge thing. I used to literally hang out and party with the band members from at least one of the bands that we all know and love, Soundgarden, and counted among my best friends some of the people in that band. I had previously to that lived on a little island in up getting kind of close to your part of the world, Connor, in northern Washington, up in the Puget Sound, a little island called Orcas Island. And I set up a sea kayak touring business up there and ran boats for a living and had a rather idyllic existence in that day. And then decided that was too easy. So I made my decision to come back down into the rest of the weird world and started school several years later. And the rest, as they say, is history. I went to school at Western States for 4 years. None of the kind of stuff that you guys represent now was available at that particular point in time. I was very much interested in physical culture, exercise science, and things of that sort. Had been something of a geek in that world for mostly endurance sports, because that was more of my liking, but had some background in strength training from people that I knew and loved that were very involved in very high level weight training. So kind of always was an interest of mine with clinical practice to be able to integrate along with manual therapy, which I was equally interested in as I went through school. I wanted to integrate more of the exercise training in it. And DNS was one of the very earliest things that I got very interested in. My conduit into the DNS system was Craig Liebenson. And Craig and I got to know each other a bit. He asked me to help him work to teach his seminars. And I did that for 4 years, along with a couple of other outstanding folks that I still call friends, Jeff Kubos and Dr. Jason Brown. So that's kind of brings me up to my training. And then beyond that is me just trying to figure out how to integrate the things that I've found interesting over the years that have come up in the clinical evidence, how to bring all of those varied elements together into something that makes sense into practice.
One thing you forgot to mention was that you're famous. And as I was reading Eagle and the Dragon the other day, which is a phenomenal book for anyone who hasn't touch that. You were mentioned near the end of the book. Chris Duffin was nice enough to credit a lot of what he's doing now at Kabuki to knowing, I guess, a host of smart people, and you were one of them. That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, it's nice to be mentioned in good company because I respect the hell out of Chris and the work that he's done. And I think to put that in context appropriately, I've been nothing more than a conduit for things that other people have taught me. And that's where the DNS stuff really came in that relationship with Chris. He walked into my office 15 years ago, at that point, I think it was about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months status post, a sternoclavicular grade 3 tear. So he had a full avulsion of the sternoclavicular head of his pec. And for those of you interested in what that looks like, if you just throw some of those keywords up in YouTube along Chris Duffin's name, you'll see a YouTube video. That video he brought in and showed it to me on his phone. And it's not pretty. It was him trying to do an iron cross after a heavy bench day. He was feeling it. And he felt it thoroughly when his pec went away. So he subsequently went to a orthopedic surgeon one time, and they said, no, you've just got a strain. And he's like, I've had lots of strained muscles. I can't make this part of my pec work. And the orthopedist did a little manual palpation on him and said, we can't feel the typical ball of the muscle over here or over here. And so they sent him home, and he's like shaking his head and he's pissed off. And a couple of weeks later, he goes back to the orthopedist. He's like, no, not working. And they finally did ultrasound, which I think led to an MRI as well. And sure enough, there's the little dangling fragment of bone on the study. So they reattached the sternoclavicular head of his pec, and Chris comes in and he says, I want Graston treatment. I did some online search, and your name came up with Graston. I'm like, why in the hell do you want Graston treatment on this? I said, well, your name keeps coming up on Graston, and it's because I was the third person in Portland to actually take up that technique. And he said, I was getting Graston for another chiro, and I don't know, the guy just didn't really impress me all that much. I'm like, well, you're going to be even less impressed with me when I tell you I don't think you need Graston for what you got that's going on. I said, if I got to, I'll give you what you want. But I took a look at him and the way that he was organized in this area. Many of your watchers to this have some exposure to DNS principles. And among those principles are, as I like to distill them down to, and this is purely my distillation take on the DNS stuff, and it certainly isn't intended to offend anyone, but I respect my Prague colleagues at the highest degree. But I think many of them would agree with this distillation. The three primary tenets are: one, what I refer to as right position; two, which is what I'll refer to as right stereotype; and three, which is base of support. So the right position is getting in the cylinder that the abdominal cavity represents, with a piston-like arrangement with the top and bottom, the top being diaphragm, the bottom being pelvic floor. We'd like to see that top and bottom in rough opposition to each other. And the place that runs afoul is in our patients that look kind of like this, if you can see that. So Chris is standing there in front of me with his chest out, his ribs really prominent. And I had the audacity with, as you can see, my skinny behind, to point at him in that area and say to him, I'll help you with your shoulder stuff and your pec stuff, but if you'll let me work on that, I think I can help you squat and deadlift more weight. And as I think he puts it in the book, and I know it's on since I just saw the cut of the documentary that's been done on him, and I've got some screen time on that, and you can hear some of the things that I said on there. Chris looked me up and down twice, and he said, "What in the hell are you going to teach me about squatting and deadlifting more weight?" I said, "Maybe nothing." I said, "How about?" So I laid him on his side in what all of us learned to be a standard orthopedic testing position for strength in the gluteus medius. Stacked, inside lying, hips straight up and down, shoulders straight up and down, top leg straight, abduct the leg, and then hold against resistance. And I put downward resistance with one hand, and I took, at that point in time, the third strongest man in his weight class in powerlifting, and I took him down with one hand. And I said, "Okay, so that's a test for that particular muscle." He said, "Would you agree that that particular muscle group, your primary gluteal muscles, are important in squatting and deadlifting?" And he said, "Absolutely." I said, "Well, let me show you a different position that will confer better strength to those muscles." And I took him out of that chest up and ribs up position and put him in a stacked position, held him there, and even challenged him with a little bit of movement to kind of anchor that position in place, and then repeated the test. Tried to take him down with one hand, could not do it. Tried to take him down with two hands, could not do it. So to prove the point, I took my 155 body weight and I planked on his abducted leg. I said, "Can you see that being in that position allows you to get better control of those target muscles that you so much desire to work well for you on those two primary lifts?" And he was like, "Wow, okay." I said, "Now, is that the position that you get in when you squat?" And he said, "Well, I kinda." And I said, "Based on the videos that I've watched of you squatting and deadlifting, it's not." I said, "Let me show you what I mean." And he stood there kind of half smirking while I demonstrated what I had been taught from a DNS perspective to be a way to organize oneself to get to the floor and back up. And he looked at it and he remarked, I think in the book, and he did in the film, that this skinny guy actually set himself up for a pretty damn good squat. So he gave me a little license to be able to move and to start working. So true to DNS principles, we went back to developmental postures. We spent some time in 3.5-month positions, which, as you many of you folks will know, looks a whole lot like rolling around on your back and your belly like a baby. And he took that information back to the gym here at Kabuki. I wasn't here at Kabuki at the time. And he started getting his staff and fellow lifters, highly trained lifters, to do this stuff. And all of them were like, "Boo, yes, what are you doing? This is stupid. Give us some heavy weight. We want to move heavy weight." And then they started applying those on setup to their basic lifts. And he came back only a couple of weeks later, and he had this kind of weird look. He was like, "What in the hell is all this about? This is crazy. I put 50 pounds on my deadlift and I put 50 pounds on my squat in 2 weeks. And everybody that I've taught did the same thing." And I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe what I was saying might hold some water." So the next 2 weeks went by and he came back and he said, "Here's the wild thing. we're teaching people the same techniques online, and they're putting 50 pounds on their squats and their deadlifts. So I'm like, okay, well, you may have something. So those DNS principles were then baked into the Kabuki training system as part of how they organize themselves under that. And then subsequently, Chris and I working together, distilling those processes down together, came into the basic fundamental cues of how to organize someone for performance into a squatting or lifting kind of posture. And it works whether you're just picking up, a huge bag of whatever at Costco or at the feed store or at the gardening store, or whether you're trying to deadlift 3 or 4 times your body weight. So there's a long explanation of how our relationship got started.
You've been gracious enough to come and present at RTP a few times, and you've been super generous with us, the RTP reps here at the University of Western States. I want to dive in just a little bit on what your relationship is with RTP, why you like RTP. I know that Justin Dean, maybe you can talk about his history with the club, and then now your associate Tyler Johnson was one of the reps before I was. But what brings you to RTP and gravitates you towards us?
Well, as many of you are experiencing going through a pandemic and the subsequent economic crises and such, transitional periods, and birth is one of those, are commonly painful. They're painful economically and sometimes physically painful, and almost always emotionally painful. And the birth of R2P was painful as well. It was the brainchild of Craig Liebenson, and ultimately the workload of the original R2P reps, as R2P was originally conceived, was a bit much. And at that point in time in my office, I was in a room about the size of this. I was happy to share the office with Justin, who had joined my practice as an associate, and Ben Ramo, and Justin had been the international head of R2P at that point. And then Ben Ramos had succeeded him as in the same role, and Ben was preceptory in my office. And the two of them were best friends, and they were just a total cut up. So it was like, it was like coming to work in a frat house on a daily basis. But I got to see how hard they worked to try to keep that R2P ship off of the rocks through a lot of those tumultuous times. And there was one particular day where they were considering literally taking some information that they had at their disposal and flying the R2P plane into the mountain. They were literally going to try to implode the whole thing for reasons that are beyond a discussion here. You'll have to catch me over a drink sometime. But those tumultuous times did result in several schools' chapters going under for similar sorts of reasons. I sat down and had a heart-to-heart with both of them. And I said, I want you to take a step back and try to gain some sense of objectivity and a little bit of maturity. And I want you to have some objectivity about what you know right now about clinical practice. Justin, you're 1 year out of school at that point. Ben, you're in your last year. And I said, and you guys both know, if you check your ego and you put it aside and you just look objectively at the skill set that you now possess, because of your mixing and matching of multiple systems of rehab, training, and manual therapy that you get from your R2P exposure, that you could now walk into practically any clinical environment as a very young doctor and have a skill set that would rival most clinicians that have been in practice for 10 years. And I said, that's going to give you a sense of ego and hubris. So that's going to be challenging for you. But it's also important because there's something cool about this R2P process. It's like a special forces application to the profession of chiropractic and physical therapy. It gives you insight beyond what any graduate is going to have when they come out of school if they're only doing that 32 hours of didactic a week, trying to raise a family, trying to figure out all the other stuff in your life about how to do mortgages and buy practices and run practices and all that other crap that you learn at that particular point in your life. And I said to him, I said, is there a way for you to conceive of organizing R2P into something that will persist beyond these tumultuous times? Is there a way to shed that growth period and to mature into something that can grow and continue to appeal to students that are above average in curiosity, diligence, and organization? And I'm very pleased and proud to say that they put a very good structure in place. And then they put a very good, I insisted that I stay apart from it because I was too close to it at that point, and I didn't want to be too associated with it. I said, I'm here for you as a mentor. I'm here to provide guidance here and there, but I do not want to run or control R2P. And they went and found some very good people, some of them Logan grads, Marianne DMAC, at that point, Marianne Harrington, and Jeff Baran, and both very good friends of mine. And they set up the R2P national program. And R2P has, despite the slings and arrows of pandemic misfortunes thrown at it, seems to be still alive and kicking, thanks to folks like yourselves.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thank you for that.
Origin stories are
I
always
know.
fun.
I'm just listening the whole time. I forget to even think about a follow-up question or a comment. I'm like, that was great.
Sonny, let me sit you down, Sonny, and tell you why. when your mom and I were really young.
Oh, my God.
Can you one of the things that we're trying to work on with R2P that we were talking about coming into the new student board, Sean and I and a couple others, Tristan and Patrick, we're talking about ways that we can, start to teach content ourselves and, get into the, maybe not the seminar space, but just ways that we can give back to students by putting together our own programs and stuff. And I would love to hear about how you first got into teaching courses and organizing courses. The first time I heard your name was just some of the upper quarters would always talk about fix your own back as like how they would do their entire low back flow and stuff like that. I know that's no longer running after the pandemic. But how did you get into things like fix your own back and dermal traction stuff? And then we can get into neurocentric after.
Cool. I would say, first off, don't be so fast to predict the demise of Fix Your Own Back. One, I'm dusting it off and retooling it. I've made that decision as recently as in the last few days. I think there's still a space for that.
There's tons of interest here
Cool.
to come and do that.
I'm happy to hear that. I will say, everything that has a 3-letter acronym associated with my name is there because somebody asked me to put it there. I have never put together any kind of program with the design to be some mucky muck, be some egghead, or to get rich and famous. I have merely done things that have been asked of me. I'm a polite Southern boy at my core, and I don't go places that I'm not invited to. So I will always wait for that invitation before I'll do anything. And in this particular case, I mean, at my core, and the pandemic has really shown me this, as it has perhaps even to some of your listeners and to you guys, at my core, I am really a hardcore introvert. I could easily curl up with, research articles and books and geek out and just keep my day to one-on-one clinical practice with patients and be extraordinarily happy with that. I am absolutely fulfilled and inspired every single day when I go to work. I love clinical practice, and I can't imagine retiring from it ever. So I will always keep some level of clinical practice going because it's good for me. As far as the first thing that I put together was a program called that ultimately became my rehab exercise. My rehab exercise is no longer a real thing. It was about time for it to be sunsetted. It was 12 years old, I think, 2 years ago when we put it to rest. But I had a formative moment one day when in clinical practice, and I was running 2 rooms clinically at the time. And I went back and forth from one room to the next on 3 successive patients. All of them were disc patients that I was rehabbing, and all of them were at the exact same point in the rehab process in which I would be teaching them McGill's Big 3. So I had a disc herniation in my first year of practice, and it was part of what formed my clinical practice and got me very interested in Stu's work, because candidly, I was near the top of my class. I was summa or cum laude and in my class, and I felt like I had done due diligence to my training, and I couldn't fix myself with the training that I had received, and I got fuck all for help from people that I respected in my program, who were my mentors and teachers. So I had to get into the literature, and this is well before the World Wide Web. So I had to go into the stacks and study and learn that material, and then actually go and spend time with people like Stu McGill to learn their material. But in this particular day in clinical practice, I said exactly the same thing to 3 different patients in a row. And I felt like, if it means anything to any of you guys, like a Catskills comedian doing 4 shows a day at a Catskills resort, delivering each joke or each punchline with just a little bit of different nuance and seeing what worked. And finally, I realized, I ought to just record this stuff and put it somewhere where I can give it to people. And YouTube had just been bought by Google, so YouTube was taking off. I was like, I'm going to take these things, and I recorded bird dog, a side plank, and a trunk raise. And I put together my YouTube channel, and I put them on the YouTube channel. And I started sending patients to those URLs, and predictable things happen. I'd send a URL this long, transposition errors would happen, and folks would wind up all over the internet doing all kinds of interesting things. So then I said, well, I'm going to have to put them in one spot. So I learned how to do a little coding, and I built a little website and put those 3 exercises on a little website. And I sent my patients to that website. And oddly enough, I called the website Fix Your Own Back. And that's not the website that ultimately became Fix Your Own Back. A year or so went by, and my patients started saying, well, you know, the Fix Your Own Back, or the Fix Your Own Back site's great. It's really nice. And those 3 exercises help my back a lot. But what do I do next? I'm like, well, that's a good point. So, you know, as I continue to read the literature, and as I continue to learn more about DNS and FMS and SFMA, I'm like, this seems to be a good step. And Stu McGill's work suggested a rubric that kind of worked from building endurance to building some agility, and building strength, building agility, and building power. So I was like, I wonder if I can add some stuff to that. So I started to make another video or 2 here and there, and I put them on that site. And then a very weird thing happened. I got emails from other doctors saying, I want to say thanks a lot for that Fix Your Own Back site that you have out there. I'm sending my patients to it, and they're getting a lot of benefit from it. I'm like, wait, what the hell are you talking about? I put that site together for my patients. And this is before we had any concept. I mean, everything was open source, right? And I said, and then they replied back. They said, well, maybe you ought to put a little bit more content on there, and then charge me a little something, and I'll be happy to pay it to be able to share it. So then I started to explore subscription-based systems, and I learned more about that. I learned more about e-commerce, and I explored other variants of exercise delivery systems for clinicians that were out there. And I bought and used 3 of them that were the top ones at the time. And I'm like, this is utter shit. This stuff was clearly, one, it was not put together with anyone who has any understanding of where the current evidence is on functional rehab, which I know is now not a very cool thing to say. It dates me, but then that was cool. But now you say functional rehab and folks just give you a big eye roll. Yeah, whatever. But then I decided that, and the other thing that was apparent in those systems is that those systems were designed by techies. They were designed by engineers. They were designed by folks in the tech industry. They did not have, clearly did not have an understanding of patient needs, nor of an understanding of doctors who were liable to be integrating with that and not having a very high level of technical expertise. So I started to put together some ideas about how to put all that together. And at that time, touchable technology and haptics were just coming on. So I was kind of looking into the distance and thinking, well, there's going to be a future where all clinicians are walking around. And laptops were just taking off. There's going to be a future where people are going to be walking around with these portable devices instead of being enslaved to a desk. And a lot of these portable devices are going to have touch things. So I said, I'm going to design an exercise delivery system for clinicians that you can hold in one hand and use the absolute minimum of key punches with one hand to be able to deliver at least 2 exercises per treatment of good quality, well-curated material to patients. And I started building that library that doc had asked me for, and I named that program My Rehab Exercise. I went and found me an engineer or software developer, and I found me a marketer, and we built My Rehab out and launched it with much fanfare, interviews with, you know, folks that are still out there in the interweb, interviews with Stu McGill, interviews with Charlie Weingroff, a lovely interview with Michael Adams, who is a biomechanics professor at University of Bristol. And he's the lead author of a book called Clinical Biomechanics, I think it's called. But those are fun interviews. And My Rehab developed, I don't know, I had about 1,000 or so people on subscription in its heyday. And then I started in the midst of all of that, I had a patient that I was working with using that process one day. And to get back to it, I'm wordy, guys, when I get started. And you asked the question, Connor. So you invited me. So you just sit there and listen now.
I'm listening.
So Fix Your Own Back, this is how it got started. That original website that had the name Fix Your Own Back, I still had domain name. And I had a patient encounter one day that was very poignant. It's to this day a little hard for me to get through without choking up just a little bit. But it was around the time that I had started working with Duffin and these guys, so they started sending a lot of lifters over to me that had disc herniations. And my reputation locally began to grow a little bit as someone who knew a little something about how to keep people in the gym once they'd have that injury. And I was working with this very large, very imposing looking individual. And some of your listeners might be able to relate to this if they're meatheads and they spend a lot of time under bar. But a lot of people in that world, their sense of self is partly defined by their ability to move heavy things. For many of them, they're somewhat, at least I see it regularly in the kabuki environment, they're emotionally challenged people that have been through a lot of shit. And they found a way of measuring sets, reps, and poundage as a proxy for developing strength, something that they can measure. And in the process of doing that, just like within the CrossFit community, finding community and other people. And that's a beautiful thing that you don't hear talked about much when we talk about, gym culture and things of that sort. And it's something that CrossFit has done incredibly well at. But this guy sat in front of me. We were 45 minutes into our hour-long bit, and he had come in barely able to stand up straight, barely able to get in and out of his car, and I had just had him pulling a 35-pound kettlebell off the floor repetitively with no pain, without a manipulation, without any manual therapy. And I did something that I teach in the clinical companion to Fix Your Own Back course. I looked at him and I made direct eye contact and I said, "How do you feel? Do you feel better, worse, or same than when you came in here?" And he looked at me and tears started running down his face. And he said, "I feel good. I feel really good." And I said, "Do you feel like you know more than you did when you came in?" He said, yeah, I've got a really good idea about what I was doing wrong and what I need to do right. And then I looked at him and said, and who did that? And he almost started to point my way, and then he kind of smiled half. And he said, I did that. And he just started bawling. And I said, why are you crying, man? Are you okay? What's going on? And he just dropped his head and he let out a few sobs. And he looked up at me and he said, why in the fuck didn't anybody teach me this 2 years ago? And I felt for him because I knew what he felt like, because I had felt that way too. That injury brings you to your emotional knees, because as a first year chiropractor with that, purportedly having been taught to be an expert in the spine, I didn't know how to address it well. I knew some McKenzie. I did not know how to address it well. And it threatened my sense of security. I had at that point in time close to 200,000. It's much more now, of course, in students' debt looking down the barrel of. I had a young child at home, a wife that had supported me and put me through school. These are all stories that many of you share at your particular point in development right now. And I couldn't work because of my back. My back seized up on me 4 times in my first year over patience. I had to leave the clinic because I could not stand up straight. So I was highly motivated to figure this out. So when this guy said that, it was like, I know I have an interesting body of knowledge now, and I should be able to put it together in something in that little online widget that I used to have that was aimed towards people in the general public, my patients at that point in time. I said, I should be able to put something together that will actually leverage the current science on these fields of X-ray interpretation, biomechanics, pain science, etc., and exercise science, etc., into something that's easier to understand. And if I have a secret power, if there is anything that I'm really, really good at, I tend to do well at taking complex subject matter and bringing it down into something that's easy to understand for people. I remember, I think it was Napoleon Hill or one of those early, self-help gurus and marketing gurus that said, always distill your information down to something that a 4th grader can understand. So I started working on that, and I already had a library of videos on my rehab. So I started putting together an educational system that explained how I work with patients, but the target market was with disc herniation, but the target market was people in the general public who were trying to make sense of the disc herniation that they had and how to navigate it. And I started putting together the Fix Your Own Back program that way. And the exercise library that was included in that came directly from my rehab. And then Fix Your Own Back puttered along for several years and became a thing. And then one day, yet again, I started to get approached by other clinicians, and they're like, how do you do this fix your own back thing with patients? How can I incorporate that treatment modality or that approach to working with disc patients in the clinic? So I was asked, they said, you should put together a CE course and teach me how to do that. So I did. I called it the Clinical Companion to Fix Your Own Back. And I taught it for a year, and then other life things got in the way, and I shelved it for a period of a year, and then I took it out in earnest and taught it hardcore for about 3 years. And that was just before the pandemic. And when in 2019, I had about 18 months of teaching engagement set up all over the world. I was set up for all across the US, Canada, South America, had Asia on the horizon, some gigs in Europe. And the future was looking bright. And I was like, okay, this is a shift in my career. I'm going to move to a boutique practice. Our clinic that was the multidisciplinary clinic I'd been in for 15 years for other reasons was starting to, we had all decided to disband. So I went in with one of my former students at a lovely facility here in Portland and took a room and just practiced a few half days a week and was like, I'm just going to go and teach. And that's going to be my next phase of my life. And you guys all know the next statement. COVID happened and all of that went away. And I found myself in a position with the boutique practice, which was at that time I had set up to be all cash. That was not feasible and did not have the margins to be able to, and I had to close down for 3 months. So I lost all of my income because my rehab at that point was had just been sold or licensed to go elsewhere and become something different. So in one fell swoop, I had three major income sources that provided my living went away with the pandemic. So I was sweating bullets like everybody else, and I had to get creative. And that was the point where Justin and I, right before the pandemic, we had literally sat down. And once again, I was asked several times by him. He was down in LA and he was applying the things that he had learned and us working together and that we had started developing together. I had shown him dermal traction method, which that's a different story. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much time you guys have got, and I'll go all the way up to, I got 30 more minutes if you guys want to play it out that long. But how you guys, you good for that? Okay.
Yeah.
When Justin joined my practice, since you asked about DTM, this is a bit of a funny story. One of the things that I had found, I had been very interested in myofascial trigger points while I was a student, methodology to treat myofascial trigger points, and had done a lot of learning on that and taken a lot of coursework on it while I was still a student. And I was also fascinated by the work of David Butler, who some of you know from NOI, Neuro-Orthopedic Institute, and his subsequent work with Lorimer Mosley. And they had some tangential work with another physiotherapist named Bob Elvey. And those folks were all the first ones that really started to blend pain science and neural dynamics. And the neural dynamics part was heavily borrowed from an MD by the name of Alf Brieg, B-R-I-E-G. And Shacklock and Butler shared office space, or they literally worked right down the hall from each other at one point in time. And there was a point in that growth where Michael's work went more towards the manual therapy end of things, And David's work went more toward the pain science thing. And they kind of, they had a respectful collegial disagreement about how those two processes were tangential. And I held the work on both of those schools of thought very highly. And I kept thinking there's got to be some way of bridging this. And again, if there's a subset of things that I count among the things that I tend to do well, it's to take silos of information, which many of you guys have maybe been exposed to. They usually come with 3-letter acronyms, and you learn them. And at some point, the person or people that develop them get placed way up on a pedestal, and they develop a tribe around them. And in this social media world, there becomes a whole lot of kowtowing and bowing down and big man chieftain kind of socio-political situations where whatever that person says is, still good, and evidence doesn't matter anymore. And it just becomes this big horseshit show. And yet often those systems in their inset were beautiful. They were gorgeous, and they had lovely intentions. But, it's like the old saying, sweet Jesus, please save me from your followers. I mean, it kind of becomes that. These things become pseudo religions, and people start to identify with them in that way. Well, I was frustrated by that. And then on a third leg of all of that, I was studying fascial manipulation from the Stecco tribe. And I was in the first group of docs in the US that studied with them. So I was bringing these three things together when I was studying Stecco. And I remember sitting there and thinking while I was doing their coursework, and their putative mechanism for the pain spots that they're working on is that the fascia is stuck there. It's adherent. And you're going to release it with manual therapy. And the earliest papers on the fallacy of that thinking were starting to come out, and I had read those. So I was thinking maybe there's something else going on. And as I was listening to them talk about all of these points that they called centers of coordination, and the centers of coordination were where layers of fascia overlap, that if you did a vector analysis of movement around a joint, let's say the elbow, and here's flexion in the elbow, and you do a vector analysis of all the muscles that have an effect on flexing the elbow, then we might come to a point somewhere around here where all of those muscles overlap in fascia, fascial planes. And their theory was that the hyaluronic acid is too dense in that area, and those fascial layers are not sliding. And their theory was they could heat up the fascia in that area and the hyaluronic acid to restore mobility by doing cross-fiber friction, which was one of the first manual therapy techniques I learned in chiropractic school. It's from James Syriac's cross-fiber friction. And I was like, really? This is one of the top manual therapy techniques in the world, and they're repackaging James Syriac's? And as I thought about it, I'm like, those centers of coordination look like Janet Travell and David Simon's myofascial trigger points. And I knew that their clinical reasoning behind that system suffered because of circular reasoning. They proposed to start off that there's been some injury to a muscle. And how many people with a myofascial trigger point in their upper trapezius do you know of that have a frank injury to the upper trapezius? Practically none. So I also knew that the myofascial trigger point literature, when overlaid with the acupuncture literature, there was about an 80% positive correlation between the most commonly needled acupuncture meridian points and the most commonly treated acupuncture trigger points. And now we're seeing essentially the stecco hands on the elephant and all of these blind systems trying to describe what they were seeing. And the light that went on in my head was, what's common about all of those systems in those points? And the common thing I remembered from my anatomy work and from some of the emerging evidence from Butler and from Shacklock was that nerves pierce the fascia at that particular point. I was like, that's fascinating. So then I wrote down in the stecco course, I literally jotted out a flow chart that just kind of hit me like a train. And it looked like fascial densification leads to poor fascial movement at an interface point with neurology. And that neurology, depending on the size and the caliber of it, will cause referred pain phenomena in predictable directions. And that, if we restore that interface, then the actual thing that we're working on with the fascial manipulation is not the fascia, it's the interface between the fascia and the neurology. It's the interface, the process, rather than the structure that matters. And I was like, this is fucking it. I was like, this is it. And I took it up. I took it up to Antonio Stecco like a cat bringing a mouse into its owner. You know, I'm sitting there meowing to Antonio, look at my cool algorithm. And he looked at it and he says, in his inimitable Italian English, no. No. He said, you're describing neurogenic or neuropathic pain. And then he gave me the definition of neuropathic pain from the International Association for the Study of Pain, which was accurate, but at that particular point in time, no longer, I might add. Neuropathic pain described a phenomenology that affected peripheral neurology, mixed nerves, not so much cutaneous neurology. And what I was describing was a step down from the peripheral work that I had learned, the peripheral nerve work that I had learned from Bob Elvey, from David Butler, and from Michael Shacklock, and was starting to move down. I was starting to move down into smaller neurology and play with that. And I was not the only one. There were other colleagues that some of them have gotten their undies bunched thinking that they were the only ones in the world working on this at the same time. And I'll name one of them, Diane Jacobs, and she did a wonderful system that she calls dermoneuromodulation, and it's wonderful. But it was primarily aimed at physical therapists because she really has a bee in her bonnet about chiropractors. She does not like chiropractors. And when I saw her work, I was working on what we at that point in time called yank away pain, or YAP. More in a moment. And there was a shit show on the dermoneuromodulation site 2 years later, because I went to Diane at that time and she was giving away her PDF for dermoneuromodulation. I'm like, you've done a really good job here, and you've done a service to the community of practitioners and a service to the people at large. And I'm sending you a check to pay for what I've taken from the work that you've given. But I need you to hear this clearly. I'm chasing the same rabbit that you are, and eventually it's going to come up. And when it does, I want you to have record of this conversation and the fact that I didn't just take your stuff, I paid you for it, even though you didn't want money for it. So I was trying to stay on the high side of that. And 2 years later, her minions and tribal, folks, and she has gotten very much that around her. They crucified me, or attempted to, on that dermoneuromodulation site. And I will say, to my credit, I kept it above board and I responded consistently, collegially, in kind, and with evidence. And I think I kept the high road on that one. And for what it's worth, the stuff that I do and that I teach can do everything that dermoneuromodulation can do in half the time. Which, if I want to, that if there are any physical therapists listening to this, then you're already in our camp of folks that don't give a damn about what the acronym or the initial is past your name. So hopefully this won't offend you. But that is essentially the history of chiros interacting with PTs. PTs do excellent work more thoroughly often than chiropractors do, and chiropractors often do work more quickly and achieve results more quickly than physical therapists do. So that's a broad stroke statement, and haters come at me on social media, because I don't live there.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
So I think
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. You guys got to talk sometime too. Right?
I like this. I mean, this is awesome. So like you said, origin stories are great. And like kind of I see us kind of following this rabbit, right? We're going towards it. So I'll poke you a little bit and get to the neurocentric approach stuff. So obviously this is kind of where a lot of your time lies now, instead of the fix your own back and all that. But so can you explain to me and Alex, who come from Logan, where we talk a little bit about central, peripheral, cutaneous type stuff, a little bit of the neurocentric approach, but we don't get that out our way, especially since you're on the other side of the country. But could you explain that a little more? Like, is it a technique, a system? How does it fit into what we do as manual therapists, exercise science background individuals?
Completely understandable. Again, you can get lost in the acronyms and including the ones that just I have put out. And I will say, you can get those things on your side of the country and have in the past. R2P at Logan, when Grant Elliott was your head there, hosted me, and the Kyle triumvirate. I think there were three incredible Kyles there at that time, and I was absolutely dumbfounded with the you guys were setting a high watermark for R2P at that time. And I remember coming back to Western States and I'm like, you guys got some work to do. and then Grant, God bless him, he took the things that he learned in the coursework, and during the pandemic he just killed it. He took those things and he put it into a lovely program of what he's doing online. And I've never said anything publicly about it, but Grant, if any of this gets back your way, kudos, brother. You've done a hell of a job, and I am incredibly proud of the work that you've done out there. And for what it's worth, I'm now copying you, you son of a bitch. And so it goes. But I love you, and you owe me a beer someday. But because I think I bought yours the last time. But anyway, maybe it was the other way around. How did all that come together to make NCA? I never talked about YAP or DTM, and looking at the clock, I will save the YAP story for another time, or you can look elsewhere from it. I've told it before. But YAP had to be, as a name, needed to go away, because the day that I stood in front of 25 physiatrists at the Kaiser Permanente physiatry department, after being asked once again to describe what the hell it was I was doing clinically that was taking their surgical patients out of the surgical algorithm by tugging on skin and having people move. And when I told them the origin story of YAP, and that YAP meant yank away pain, it was like, a mic drop with no effect. I had a bunch of professionals, a bunch of MDs look at me like, that's right, he's a chiropractor. So I was like, well, we're going to have to call this something else. And that's when we came up with a different acronym, DTM. I never really marketed it because it's a technique, and I don't like techniques. Kairos are like crows to shiny things, or crows to shiny things are like kairos to techniques. Kairos are always looking for a shortcut to do that thing faster, to save time and the treatment time, to improve their bottom line. And I don't like that. I like thorough treatment. And all of my treatment encounters have been 30 minutes for my entire career as a result. It's not the best clinical model. The best model is probably a 15-minute model where you employ a CA to help you with that and run multiple rooms. But that's another story in a chiropractic economics class. I never talked about it because I kept alluding to the fact that it was part of a system of the way that I work in clinic. And then people would inevitably ask, well, what's this system? And I got asked again at a different time. I took a year sabbatical several years back to work on some of these other projects, and my associates ran my clinic. And at that particular point in time, Dr. Corey Peterson and Dr. John Parker were my associates at the time. And thank you to those gents if they ever watch anything like this, because they were incredible in holding the fort down for me clinically during that period of time. But all of the MDs in town that I enjoyed the referrals from, they said, "Great, Doc, congrats on the sabbatical. Who do we refer to?" And I was like, "Well, you refer to my associates that I've taught how to do the things that I do." And well, by the way, what do you call that? I'm like, call it 20 years of geeky persistence and deep reading into the literature and study at the knees of major researchers. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, that's a mouthful. I'll just send them to your associates." And then I was at a course, actually a Shacklock course in LA with Justin Dean. And on a break, Justin called me out and he was like, "Phillip, you have got to move to LA." I'm like, "Justin, I don't want to live in LA. Visiting's fine." But he's like, "No, you've got to come down here. I'm using what I learned in your clinic, and it sticks out so much down here in this market, which is one of the more difficult markets to crack." He says, "I'm killing it. My referrals are through the roof. I'm all cash. I'm charging top dollar. I can't, I need somebody to help. Will you move down here and help?" I'm like, "Hell no. I love it in Portland." He said, "Okay, well, at the very least, we ought to name this. We ought to talk about this." So we started talking about that in subsequent conversations. And then ultimately, literally 1 week before the pandemic started, we had been in conversation with Guido Reisigam. And Guido, I invited he and Justin to my home in Portland, and we hung out for a weekend brainstorming what coursework like that might look like. Guido was involved because he had been doing, Guido's long in the tooth, he's been doing this a minute too, and he'd been doing some interesting manual therapy techniques that were somewhat similar to the dermal traction method stuff. And it was Guido that actually came up with the name Neurocentric Approach. And I hope at some point in time that Guido will join us on the faculty and help teach this stuff over time. But at that time, we started working together and we talked with a few other people that were teaching similar kinds of programs, and their stuff just didn't quite work they weren't quite going in the same direction we were going. We were really in a neurocentric bent. And the neuro thing that we were working on was multifaceted. It was brain-based, which is neuro incorporating pain science. It was mechanically oriented based on the neurodynamics work of mainly the outstanding work of Michael Shacklock, which all of you should do. But Michael's work at that time was almost completely on peripheral neurology. And there really wasn't much work being done on the cutaneous neurology, and we were going there as well. So we started deep diving the surgical and anesthesiology literature on techniques to avoid or target small neurology with surgical or anesthesiology procedures, primarily because those two fields are looking for either locations where multiple nerves or key nerves are located. Multiple, important because if you infiltrate anesthetic in one spot and you can target 3 or 4 nerves, that's peace-loving guitars. That's good work, man, because you're getting good bang for your buck. And surgical because you don't want to screw up and cut any nerves. So both of those often involve nerves being very close to the skin. And nerves, our thinking was nerves that are close to the skin means that we're more likely to have a mechanical effect by working on the skin in that area to do anything, whether it's mashing, shearing, or lifting. And a lot of the work at that point in time that I've been focused on was lifting and creating space, which was novel. Nobody else was really doing that at that time. So the idea was with some cutaneous nerves, you can lift and create space, and then borrowing from the factor traditions from folks of wonderful work of Greg Dorr and Thomas Hyde, who I've learned from, we combined movement. And what movements? We use functional movements. Screw you. Functional movements, proudly said. We used functional, complex movements that involve multiple joints. And we incorporated DNS movements into that while applying that traction. And then we found that some of those points that where the nerve seemed to be not moving well were too deep for that. So then Justin started to work with ideas of transverse nerve modes, which are a little more uncomfortable, and getting down deep next to the nerve and then bending it. We describe those processes. So that involves learning more about the anatomy and being able to palpate better where those nerves are, find their line of drive, compare it to the line of action of the joints that you're working with, and then pulling and moving the nerves there, and then finally doing deep tissue work at the deepest level of the deep fascial planes where interface dysfunctions can happen. So this would be a good time, Connor, with the last 5 minutes for you to pull up that slide on a screen share that kind of describes the ecosystem to fully answer Sean's question.
You got that, Alex?
You got to be careful what questions you guys ask me.
All right, you put this in the.
Because I will answer them.
You've
We'd
done
be
well.
happy to have you.
Yeah, I can get.
We'd be happy to have you for a part 2 if you're interested next week or something like that. So we got so many more questions for you.
I'll write them down, and I'm happy to do this again.
Alex, you got that?
Yeah.
Have you got that screen share, brother?
Here we
If
go.
not, I can
You're-
screen share.
Yeah, you realize you're talking to the least technologically literate of the 3.
This is true.
Uh-oh.
Uh,
Oh, don't show me
Careful.
on. There it is. I don't want to see all the photos. Okay, so I mentioned it as a system and that the NCA process, and a little R there is, yeah, I did. Screw all of y'all. We did trademark. This is a registered trademark. So, this is one of those times where the way that I've been treated out there in the world, I'm going to flip it right back around on people. And if folks start using Neurocentric, I'm going to come legally at your ass. So you either get creative on your own end and describe your own stuff and copy it. I don't mind that, but don't use neurocentric. Yeah, I'm sure, I think imitation is the highest form of flattery. And I think we've done something here that is worthy of being imitated. There's three primary things that happen here with the ecosystem. We got an assessment, we got a treatment, and then ultimately the material as we build it out will also work on specific conditions. With the assessment, we talk about a graded neuro exam. We start with bigger neurology and work down to smaller neurology. The biggest neurology is the brain, so we work on top-down processes and take into account the pain science, the belief systems, the yellow flags that all of us learn about, and we take that into consideration as part of the assessment and take it into consideration as part of the treatment with that patient. We learn those things in the patient history. We also do a physical exam on the other caliber of neuro. The next biggest neuro is the spinal cord, and attached to the spinal cord are the nerve roots and the IVF. So we've got an interface point of spinal cord, nerve root, and IVF. So we describe physical examination techniques to learn more about what might be going on at that particular location of interface. Then we consider the interfaces downstream to the next largest group of nerves. That's the peripheral neurology, the mixed nerves. And we consider the path of those mixed nerves. We describe manual techniques and your standard clinical examination of numbness, tingling, and weakness on those nerves since they're mixed nerves. And then we move down to the smallest level of neurology, cutaneous neurology, and we describe manual techniques to assess and treat that particular part of the neural compartment. All of that incorporates the clinical audit process. You learn from the patient an index movement, what hurts, what movement, what activity, what posture hurts. You set that up as an index. If you don't have that from the patient, then you derive it from the physical exam, from positive physical exams in your orthopedic or neurological exam. And then repeatedly through the clinical encounter, you retest against it. That's the clinical audit process. So you develop a theory of neurology being under threat, and whether it is, it's not always, but commonly we will find that neurology that is under threat. I just published a piece on my Medium channel under threat. If you just Google me under Medium for threat, you'll find that piece just put up a couple of days ago. But that threat can be top down, that threat can be bottom up, but you assess for that threat and you treat the threat, whether it's top down or bottom up or both. And for everybody, it's both. But that threat to neurology commonly is the first domino. And that threat to neurology causes motor behavior to change to protect the neurology. That tight muscle activity, the asymmetry and hypertonus of a muscle, alters joint kinematics. In chiro, we're taught to assess for joint kinematics. And then what are we taught to do? Boom, hit it hard to restore movement. Don't ask questions, let God sort it out, right? It's like, what? So what we're looking for there is, and those of you in chiro world might even have taken one step further and learned manual therapy techniques to assess for tight muscles. And then you learn all kinds of exotic therapies, instrument assisted, manual, to stretch tight muscles. And you fix the tight muscles and your job is done. And the patient temporarily feels better. And then their symptoms return and they come back. And that's a good business model, I might add. But if there is neurology that is under threat, that is driving that hypertonus, that is driving the altered joint kinematics, and you aren't even aware of it, and you're not looking for it, you won't find it. We teach you how to look for it, how to find out if it's there, and how to treat it if it is. Because here's the cool part. If you find it and treat it, usually the hypertonus gets better on its own. The joint kinematics restore on their own with very little need for manual therapy or manipulation, to the degree that many chiropractors use it for right now. So it does reduce the number of treatments that you need to name that clinical tune for those ICD-10 codes you see on the conditions over here. So you got to get better at doing new patient exams, because it will make people talk. You'll make things better in short order. You know, case right now in my office, one of the most respected people, the first person to bring CrossFit to Portland, 20 years of chronic elbow pain and extension intolerance. And this guy is one of the top people in the CrossFit community in the country. And we're 2 treatments in, and he's made more progress than he's made in 20 years of getting treatment all over the world for this, because nobody's asked questions about the neurology and how that's involved in this particular stuff. Actually, some people have, but then they've approached it from the standard numbness, tingling, weakness model. So there you have it. Coming soon to a neighborhood near you, but like I said, with all of the other things, I ain't going nowhere unless you ask me. So if you want me to come to Logan, ask me. If you want me to come down to, or us, I'm saying, me will be for the clinical companion to fix your own back. I'll teach that one. And for the neurocentric approach coursework, Justin and I will both come. But historically, we've been hosted by R2P chapters at CMCC, at SCSI, at Western States, at Logan, almost at National, but that one never came off. Almost at New York, but that one never came off. Yeah, so I don't know. If you guys want to make it happen in R2P, I'll make it happen for you.
Well, we do have that new R2P membership, and so maybe we can figure out a way to work that in. We can talk off air about that at some point. We would love to have you on again. I think I speak for all of us saying that, because we didn't even get to, we had questions about your favorite beer products, etc. for you.
I rarely drink beer anymore. But
no, beer.
I rarely, beer, my favorite beer products?
that was from Bo.
I'm important. Okay, so I'm going to give you half a second to think this out. Your clinical reasoning. I'm in Portland. This is the land of artisanal things, the land of DIY. Whose products do you think are my favorite ones for beer? I make my own.
I was going to say, a little olive oil.
Oh. You got a trademark on those?
Yeah.
I'll be bringing a 3-letter trademark to your beer.
There it is.
This is great though. That was fascinating. I think people are going to love that, because that was, I love the history, and just everything was just like a good story the entire time. I think you ought to write a book at some point, if that is ever something that you're interested in doing.
I'd read it.
It's going to take more than you asking for that one.
Heck, it could just be a storybook. I'd read it.
Color by numbers.
I think maybe a comic book. I think that would be good. I think a comic book, an R2P history comic book.
There it is.
That'd be,
We'll sell
I
it.
love it. Hey, real story. The person who actually did the logo for YAP and then subsequently for DTM is the first person to pen Thor for Marvel Comics.
Oh, no shit.
Whoa.
really?
Yeah, he was a patient of mine who had hip pain that he'd seen a chiropractor for regularly, like twice a month for years and years. And I used that on his hip. and he got remarkably better. And he's like, holy shit, you know, this is awesome. How can I repay you? I feel like I owe you something more. And I'm like,
I know a way.
so we brainstormed it, and it was like this wobbly kind of idea. I was like, this puts the power of the manual therapy technique in the hands of the patient. It's empowering. It's a people-oriented kind of thing. It's like the wobbly movement, you know, the labor movement back in the 30s. And their symbol was what? The raised fist. And, you know, we've got that up there these days. So it's like, yeah, we'll put the raised fist up. And because it's Portland, we'll make the raised fist green. And we'll put the Portland city skyline in the background and Mount Hood in the background.
Nice.
And we use the same fonts that those wobbly posters use. So at some point we'll make an NFT out of it, and then I'll retire.
Yeah, there you go.
You said you weren't going to retire.
Hey, wait,
I'm holding you to
that's
that.
a 3-letter acronym.
No.
Sell it.
Okay, great. That was awesome. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you guys enjoyed the episode and look forward to the next one. And hopefully you could help us recruit Justin for the podcast. I think he'd be super interesting to have on.
I would be happy to.
Awesome. Thanks,
Well,
Dr.
thank
Snell.
you again. We really
You guys
appreciate
are
it.
awesome in your work. Keep doing great work. Go out there and help people.
Awesome.
Shit. Thank you.
Will do. Okay, take care.
See you.
All right, guys. Appreciate your work.